The Count laughed at the girl in the faded dress. But when she called the king father, he froze. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The ballroom of the royal palace in Seville shimmered beneath thousands of candles. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the gilded mirrors, multiplying the faces of Spain's nobility. Laughter rose above the music, elegant and practiced, while powdered wigs brushed together like the rustle of wings. It was the season's grandest event, the King's Spring Ball of 1764, and every noble family of Andalusia had gathered to be seen. The king sat on his throne of carved gold, his crown resting slightly askew as if even splendor had begun to weigh him down. His gaze drifted from one dancing couple to another with mild disinterest. Around him, courtiers whispered, bowed, smiled too much, and laughed too loudly. It was a night meant to prove happiness, though few seemed to feel it. Near the center of the room stood the Count of Valdenor, tall and impeccably dressed in silver. He was young enough to be proud of his beauty and old enough to use it as a weapon. His laugh carried easily through the music, polished and self-assured. Women pretended not to notice him. Men pretended not to envy him. When he spoke, others listened, if only to avoid becoming his next target. And then, as the orchestra prepared for another dance, the grand doors opened again. A murmur rose from the crowd. A young woman had entered, unannounced and unaccompanied. Her dress was plain, soft brown, faded from sun and washing. Her hair, tied with a simple ribbon, gleamed with no powder or jewel. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if a village breeze had wandered into the perfumed air of the court. A lady near the Count covered her mouth behind a fan. "Who is she?" she whispered. The Count's eyes narrowed with amusement. A servant who lost her way, perhaps. Or some merchant's daughter dreaming of silk. He raised his voice. "Careful, my lady. She may steal our attention with that daring fashion of modesty." A few nobles laughed. Others turned away, pretending not to have seen. The girl paused at the threshold, her posture straight despite the murmurs. Her eyes, dark and calm, swept the hall as though she were searching for something, or someone. Then she took another step forward. The music stopped. Every dancer froze in mid-turn. The Count smiled, delighted by the spectacle. He bowed low with mock courtesy. "Señorita," he said, "you grace us with your presence. Tell me, whom shall I thank for allowing you entry to the king's ball?" The girl stopped several steps from him. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "The invitation was not written," she said, "but promised long ago." That answer drew laughter from the crowd. The Count tilted his head. "Promised? By whom, may we ask? Surely not His Majesty. His promises are rarely made to strangers in faded gowns." Her gaze did not waver. "You speak as one who knows little of His Majesty's heart." "Ah, but I know his court," the Count replied smoothly. "And in this court, appearances are not trifles. One must earn the right to be seen." "Then I have earned it," she said softly. The words silenced even those who had been laughing. The Count straightened, curiosity flickering beneath his arrogance. "Earned it? How, if one may ask?" The girl hesitated for a breath. "By birth." That single phrase rippled through the hall like wind over still water. Whispers broke out. "By birth," someone repeated. "Who is she? What does she mean? Does anyone know her?" The Count smiled again, though his tone turned sharp. "Your birth, señorita, might indeed be noble, if the proof were not hidden beneath so plain a gown. But tell us then, who are your parents? We will see if your lineage grants you such courage." The girl looked past him, her eyes fixed upon the golden throne. The king had not moved. He sat rigid, his expression unreadable, watching the exchange unfold. The air between them seemed heavy with something unspoken. The Count noticed and followed her gaze. "Ah," he said lightly. "I see. You would appeal to His Majesty himself. But my dear, the king is a patient man, not a magician. Even he cannot turn muslin into silk." Laughter returned, sharper now, cutting through the girl's silence. A lady near the dais whispered, "Someone remove her before the king is displeased." The Count took a step closer. You hear them, child. Spare yourself this humiliation. Leave quietly, and we shall forget this little intrusion." The girl did not move. Her face remained serene. Only her hands, clasped before her, betrayed the faintest tremor. She spoke again, her tone calm and deliberate. "I did not come to shame myself, my lord. I came to keep a promise. My mother said that when I turned 21, I must find the king and speak the truth he once swore to remember." The count frowned. "And what truth is that?" She turned fully toward the throne. "That he has another child." The ballroom fell into perfect silence. Every sound, the violins, the rustle of gowns, the fluttering fans, stopped as though frozen by the words. The count stared at her, then looked toward the king, expecting outrage, denial, something. But the king had risen, slowly, heavily, as if the weight of years pressed upon his shoulders. He descended one step, then another. The girl bowed deeply. "Forgive me, father. I did not wish to cause a stir." The hall gasped as one. A lady dropped her fan. Somewhere a candle flickered and went out. The count's smile vanished, leaving only disbelief. The king stood still halfway between the throne and the marble floor. His face was pale beneath the crown. For a long moment, no one dared to breathe. The count broke the silence. "Majesty," he said carefully, "shall we remove her? She is clearly mad, or deceived." The king's eyes did not leave the girl. "Who told you," he said at last, his voice rough, "to come here tonight?" The question echoed across the hall. The girl lifted her chin. "My mother, your majesty. Before she died, she said I should come when I had the courage. She said you would understand." The king's hand trembled slightly on the scepter. The court exchanged uneasy glances. A murmur spread again, this time edged with fear rather than mockery. The count looked between them, trying to read the king's face. There was something in it he had never seen before, a shadow of recognition. "Majesty," the count pressed, "surely this cannot—" The king raised one hand, silencing him. His eyes remained fixed on the young woman. "What was your mother's name?" The girl hesitated. "Elena de Alvar," she said quietly. The name seemed to strike him like a blow. His breath caught. Several courtiers turned to one another, searching their memories, whispering, "Elena de Alvar, the lady who vanished years ago. A musician's daughter, wasn't she?" But the king heard nothing except that single name repeating in his mind. He took another step forward. The crowd parted before him, bowing instinctively, though none were told to. The count, suddenly uncertain, moved aside. When the king stopped before the girl, he spoke softly, so only those nearest could hear. "Where did you grow up?" "In a convent near Cadiz," she said. "The sisters raised me. My mother left me there before she passed away. She said one day I would understand why." The king's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened for a moment, then hardened again. "And she told you to come here?" "To me?" "Yes, father." The word hung in the air, impossible, dangerous, sacred. No one dared repeat it. The count looked from her to the king, expecting laughter, anger, denial. None came. The king turned slightly, addressing no one in particular. "Leave us," he murmured. The courtiers froze. The count stepped forward. "Majesty, with respect, I said leave us." The tone was final. The music master dropped his bow. Servants hurried toward the doors, nobles whispering frantically as they retreated. The count lingered, uncertain whether to obey. The king looked at him once, a glance sharp enough to send him moving. Soon only the king, the girl, and a handful of stunned attendants remained in the great hall. The king studied her face. His own seemed to age with every heartbeat. "How old are you?" he asked. 21, your majesty." He exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. 21, he repeated, as if counting backward through years he wished forgotten. "Your mother died. When? When I was small. She spoke of you only once. She said you would never deny what was true, not in your heart." The king closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they shone with pain. "And she told you my name. She told me I was to call you father when the time came," Isabela said simply. "And that time is now." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The Count, standing by the door, could bear it no longer. "Majesty," he said, his voice lower now, uncertain. "You cannot allow this to stand. There are rules. There must be proof." The king turned toward him sharply. "Do you speak for me now, Count?" The sudden authority in the question froze him. "No, Majesty," he murmured, bowing. The king's gaze softened again when he looked back at the girl. "You said your name is Isabela," she replied. He repeated it under his breath as if testing the sound. Isabela. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It was her favorite name. The king swallowed hard. For a moment, he looked as though he might speak further, but then the hall doors opened again, and the queen's chief attendant entered, alarmed by the silence. The courtiers who had fled now hovered at the threshold, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. The count stepped forward quickly, regaining a fraction of his confidence. "Majesty," he said, "permit me to escort this young woman to her chambers until she will not be escorted." The king interrupted. "Then what shall we do with her?" The king looked at the girl once more. "We shall find out who she is." The count bowed, though his mind raced. He could not read the king's tone, whether disbelief or confession lay beneath it. The courtiers behind him whispered feverishly, each sentence more daring than the last. The king, meanwhile, seemed far away, staring not at the crowd, but at a memory only he could see. The girl spoke once more, her voice trembling for the first time. "Forgive me, father. I did not mean to disturb your peace." The king's lips parted as though to answer, but no sound came. His hand trembled upon the scepter again. The count, watching, felt something cold twist inside him, a fear he could not name. The hall waited. And then the king stepped down the last of the marble steps and stood before her. His expression was unreadable. His voice was scarcely more than a whisper. "Who," he said, "told you to come here tonight?" The morning after the ball broke over Seville with uneasy quiet. The palace, usually filled with laughter and gossip, now hummed with whispers that died as soon as a door opened. Servants moved faster than usual, eyes lowered, uncertain which story to believe. The king had not appeared at breakfast, the Count of Valdenor had not slept, and the girl in the faded dress had vanished into a guest chamber guarded by silence. By noon, the royal council had gathered in the Hall of Lions. The count stood among them, trying to hide his restlessness beneath the mask of courtesy. Around the long table sat ministers and advisors, each with a different version of last night's event. Some said the girl had bewitched the king. Others believed she was a madwoman, coached by enemies of the crown. A few whispered she might indeed be who she claimed to be, but none dared say it aloud. The count cleared his throat. "Majesty, the matter must be settled swiftly," he said when the king entered. "Rumors travel faster than truth. Allow me to question her myself. If she speaks falsehood, the court will know it." The king took his seat slowly. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. "There will be no public interrogation." "Then what do you intend to do?" the count asked. "Keep her here," the king replied, "until the matter is clear." The council exchanged uncertain looks. The count bowed. "As you wish, sire. But the longer she remains, the greater the scandal." The king did not answer. His gaze drifted toward the tall windows, where the gardens gleamed in sunlight. "Let her rest for now. She will speak when she is ready." The meeting dissolved with murmurs of unease. The count lingered, reluctant to leave without understanding more. "Majesty," he said quietly when the others were gone, "I meant no offense last night. I could not have guessed." The king lifted a hand. "No one could have guessed." "Then, you do not deny what she said?" The king's expression hardened. "I neither confirm nor deny what I do not yet know. The truth may shame more than one of us, Count." The words struck like a warning. The count bowed again, but his thoughts were restless. He left the chamber with a sense that the air of the palace had changed, that every wall now listened. Later that day, he found her in a small sitting room overlooking the inner courtyard. 2 guards stood at the door, but inside she was alone. She was reading by the window, though the book lay unopened in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were calm, almost serene. "May I enter?" he asked. "You already have," she said. He smiled faintly, trying to recover his confidence. "You are bolder than I expected, and you are less certain than you appear," she replied. He hesitated. "The court is in chaos. They call you a fraud. They say you have bewitched the king." "And what do you say?" she asked. "I say," he began, "that you are clever. Too clever to walk into danger without reason. Tell me who you really are, and I may yet help you." "I told you who I am," she said. "It is not my fault if you laughed." He winced slightly at the reminder. "Last night was unfortunate. I misjudged." "You mocked," she corrected gently. "But it is not the first time a man has mistaken pride for strength." He frowned. "You speak like someone taught in the ways of court." "Perhaps I was," she said, her gaze turning toward the window. "Perhaps my mother taught me more than you think." "Your mother," he said, stepping closer. "Tell me about her." "She was kind," Isabela said quietly. "Gentle, but strong. She never spoke of the king until she was dying. Then she told me that once he loved her, and that love cost them both everything. She said that when I was grown, I must find him. She said he would remember her name." The Count's curiosity sharpened. "And you never thought she might have imagined it?" "No," she said firmly. "Her truth was not the kind that needs proof. It was sorrow." He studied her face, the steady calm that unsettled him. "And this letter you claim to have? Where is it?" "In the king's hands," she answered. "I gave it to his steward last night." The Count's brow furrowed. "Then we shall soon know whether it speaks truth or lies. If you wish to know the truth," she said softly, "look at him when he hears her name." That evening, the king did not dine with his court. He remained in his chambers, the letter unopened on his desk. The Count, restless, waited in the corridor outside, pacing like a man unsure of his loyalty. When at last the steward emerged, the Count stepped forward. "Did he read it?" he asked. "Not yet," the steward murmured. "He said he must first pray." The Count frowned. "Pray?" "Yes." He went to the chapel. The word spread through the palace before nightfall. The king had been seen kneeling before the altar for the first time in years. Some said he was seeking forgiveness. Others said he was haunted by a ghost. The Count listened to the whispers and felt a strange unease twist inside him. He had laughed at the girl, but the king's silence made that laughter sound hollow. The next morning, a council was called again. The king appeared tired, but composed. "The girl remains under protection," he said, "until I decide otherwise." The Count protested. "Majesty, the court will not remain quiet. The queen herself—" "She will be silent," the king interrupted. "As will you." The Count bowed, but his pride burned. When the council dismissed, he found Isabela again. "You have turned the palace against itself," he said. "What is it that you truly seek?" "Nothing that belongs to you," she replied. "You will not always have his favor," he warned. "The king is merciful, but the court is not." "I have faced worse than whispers," she said. He stared at her, frustrated. "You speak as though you pity us." "Perhaps I do," she said. "For all your titles, you are slaves to fear." Her words unsettled him. He wanted to answer sharply but found no words that did not sound small beside hers. Finally he said, "If the king orders your exile, I will not protest." She nodded. "You will do what suits your pride. You always do." He left her then, but her voice followed him like a quiet echo. That night, he attended a private supper with several nobles who had gathered to discuss the scandal. Their laughter was forced, their faces drawn. The Count drank more than usual, trying to silence his thoughts. "She must be silenced," one of them said. "Her presence insults the queen." "Perhaps she believes her own tale," another murmured. "If the king shows weakness, we will all suffer for it." The Count said nothing. When they turned to him, he lifted his glass. "Let the king decide," he said coldly. "But if she lies, I will be the first to expose her." He meant it, or thought he did. 2 days later, the queen's advisers petitioned for the girl's removal. They claimed it was to protect the king's peace, though everyone knew it was to protect the queen's pride. The king hesitated, His illness had begun. Headaches, faintness, the weight of memory pressing on him. At last he agreed to a temporary arrangement. "She will stay in the palace of San Telmo," he said, "until I summon her." The Count bowed. "Shall I see to her departure?" "Yes," the king replied. "You will ensure she is treated with respect." The irony did not escape him. The man who had mocked her now served as her escort. When the carriage was ready, Isabela stood beside it calmly. The Count waited, helmet tucked under his arm, the sunlight gleaming off his silver trim. "Do you understand," he said, "that this is for your safety?" She looked at him. "Safety from what?" "Truth. From the court," he said impatiently. "From tongues sharper than swords." "Then let them speak," she replied. "Words cannot wound what conscience protects." He gave a short, frustrated laugh. "You have an answer for everything." "I had to," she said. "It was the only way to survive." The carriage door closed. As the horses began to move, the Count glanced up at the balcony above the courtyard. The king stood there, hands resting on the balustrade, watching. His face was unreadable. The Count saluted. The king did not return the gesture. As the carriage rolled through the gates, a gust of wind caught the curtains. The Count heard a faint voice from above. A whisper he was not sure he imagined. "Isabela," the king called, barely audible. "Wait." The driver slowed, uncertain. The Count looked up sharply. The king's expression had changed. His mouth trembled as though he had spoken something forbidden. The guards hesitated, glancing toward the Count for direction. The Count turned to the driver. "Continue." But the king's voice came again, stronger now, echoing down the stone courtyard. "Stop." The carriage halted. Everyone froze. The Count stared up at the balcony. The king's hand gripped the railing. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the girl below. The courtiers who had gathered nearby exchanged glances filled with alarm. No one understood what they were seeing. The king's lips parted once more. His voice was strained, breaking under the weight of something unspoken. "Stop," he repeated. "Do not take her away." The journey to San Telmo was quiet. The Count rode beside the carriage, his thoughts heavier than the dust that clung to his boots. Inside, Isabela sat upright, her hands folded on her lap, watching the fields roll past in silence. The air smelled of orange blossoms and distant sea. No one spoke for hours. The king's command had come too late. The carriage had already left the palace gates. And though his words, "Do not take her away," still echoed in the Count's mind, the order had not been repeated. Duty left him no choice but to obey the original decree. At dusk, they reached the estate. It was a small residence surrounded by cypress trees, a place of quiet exile. The Count dismounted and opened the carriage door. "We have arrived," he said. Isabela stepped down gracefully. "You need not apologize," she murmured. "I know what obedience costs." He met her gaze briefly. "You assume too much about me." "I assume nothing," she replied. "But I can see when a man is torn between pride and conscience." Her calm unsettled him more than anger would have. He followed her inside, speaking only to instruct the servants to prepare her rooms. She thanked each of them by name after hearing it once. The small gestures disarmed everyone around her. Even the housekeeper, who had expected to dislike her, curtsied deeply before leaving. Days passed in strange stillness. The Count remained at the estate under pretext of supervision, though he knew it was not necessary. He often found her in the garden, reading or tending to the herbs. Once, he stopped at the gate and said, "You were raised in a convent, yet you speak as if you knew the court." She smiled faintly. "Books can teach the manner of words, but only silence teaches their weight." He frowned, unsure how to answer. "You speak in riddles." "Truth sounds like riddles to those who prefer certainty," she said, turning back to the roses. He left, irritated by her calmness and by his own confusion. The next morning, he arrived to find her sitting under the pergola with a letter in her hands. She looked up as he approached. "I have decided to trust you," she said simply. "That seems unwise," he replied. "Perhaps," she said. "But I must." She extended the sealed envelope. The wax bore a crest he recognized at once, the royal emblem. He hesitated. "Where did you get this?" "My mother gave it to the abbess before she died," Isabela said. "She told her to give it to me on my 21st birthday, to deliver to the king myself. But since I have failed to do so, perhaps you will see that it reaches him." He turned the envelope over in his hand. "You wish me to read it? I wish you to decide whether truth should reach him," she said quietly. He broke the seal. The paper was fragile, its ink faded. He read in silence while she watched his face. Each line seemed to strike him harder than the last. The letter spoke of love, of a child born in secrecy, of regret and forgiveness. It was signed with a name the court had not spoken in years. The late Queen Consort, Isabela of Aragon. When he finished, he stood very still. The air seemed to thicken between them. "This cannot be," he said at last. "If this letter is genuine, it means that I spoke the truth," she finished gently. He looked at her, guilt twisting inside him. "Then last night, my laughter was ignorance," she said, "and ignorance can be cured." He folded the letter carefully. "I must bring this to the king." She shook her head. "No, you must think first. The court will not believe you. They will say you forged it to restore your honor." "My honor is of little use to me now," he said bitterly. "But his daughter should not be exiled for a lie." "That is why you must wait," she said. "If the truth is to survive, it must come when no one can deny it." For a moment, he admired her courage. "You are calm even now," he said. "Does nothing frighten you?" "Yes," she said softly, "forgetting who I am." That night, he sat in his chamber staring at the letter. The words seemed to burn through the candlelight. He remembered the king's face when the girl had spoken her mother's name. The recognition had been real, and now this proof lay in his hands. But the power of such knowledge frightened him. He could ruin or redeem them both. By morning, he had made his choice. He called for his horse and rode toward Seville. But halfway along the road, a messenger met him, one of the king's pages, pale with exhaustion. "My lord," the boy gasped, "I was sent to find you. The king is ill. His advisors say the girl's claim has disturbed him. They have forbidden any talk of her in the palace." The count's grip tightened on the reins. "Did the king send you?" "No, my lord. It was the steward. He said the council fears a plot." "A plot," the count repeated. "From whom?" "The queen's brother, Don Lorenzo," the boy whispered. "He says the letter was forged. He claims it was written to disgrace the crown." The count felt a chill. "He has seen the letter?" "Yes, my lord. One of the servants took it from the king's desk." The count spurred his horse forward. "Then we are already too late." When he arrived at the palace that night, the gates were closed to him. "By order of His Majesty's council," the guard said. "No one enters without summons." "I carry something that belongs to the king," he insisted. "The king is resting," they replied. "He will see no one." The count dismounted, furious. He paced the courtyard, weighing his options. At last he turned back to the gate. "Tell your captain," he said, "that the Count of Valdenor carries proof of treachery against the crown. If he delays, he will answer for it." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but did not move. He realized then how deep the fear ran through the palace. The queen's brother already controlled the flow of words. One whisper could destroy them all. He returned to the estate at dawn, his clothes dusty, his temper raw. Isabela met him at the steps, her eyes searching his face. "You saw him?" "No," he said bitterly. "They keep him surrounded by men who fear the truth." She looked at the letter in his hand. "Then it must wait." He shook his head. "It cannot. Don Lorenzo has seen it. He has twisted its meaning. He says it was forged to disgrace the crown. If the king believes him—" "He will not," she said. "He knew my mother's name." "Names are easily buried by power," the count said. "You do not know what he faces." She stepped closer. "And you do not know what I carry." "What do you mean?" "The truth is not in that paper," she said. "It is in his heart. Letters can be burned. Hearts remember." Her quiet certainty made him stop. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You speak as though you pity him." "I do," she whispered. "He has lived too long with secrets." The Count turned away. "Secrets destroy kingdoms, and yet they protect them too," she replied. In the following days, he noticed changes in himself he could not explain. He stopped mocking the servants, spoke less sharply to his men, and spent hours walking the gardens without purpose. Her presence had become a mirror to his own pride, and the reflection unsettled him. One evening, he found her at the chapel near the olive grove. A candle flickered on the small altar. She was praying softly, her head bowed. He waited until she finished. "You pray for him," he said. "For all who suffer because of me," she answered. "Do you include me?" he asked, half smiling. "You do not suffer," she said. "You wrestle. Perhaps that is worse," he said quietly, "because it never ends." The next morning, a rider arrived from Seville. The king's steward had sent word. His Majesty's condition had worsened, and he requested the Count's return. Isabela met him at the stables as he prepared to leave. "You must tell him everything," she said. "Show him the letter." He nodded. "I will not fail you this time." She looked at him with strange calm. "If you fail me, it will not be by choice." He rode hard through the day and reached the palace at nightfall. The gates opened this time. The steward met him, anxious and pale. "The king is ill and weak," he whispered. "Don Lorenzo keeps the council under his thumb. He says the girl confessed to deceit." "That is impossible," the Count snapped. "She would never—" "She signed a document," the steward interrupted. "Her mark is on it." The Count's heart pounded. "Then it was forged." "Perhaps. But the king believes it." He ran through the corridor toward the royal apartments. 2 guards blocked his path. "His Majesty cannot be disturbed," they said. "I bring the truth," he said, thrusting the letter forward. "Let me pass." "Orders of Don Lorenzo," one replied. "Then I defy them," the Count said. The guards crossed their halberds. "No one enters." He stepped back, trembling with fury. "Tell your master that if the king dies before hearing this, his own name will be cursed before heaven." They did not answer. He turned and walked away, his boots striking the marble hard enough to echo. He left the palace and rode back into the dark fields, his anger beating against the night like thunder. By the time he reached the estate again, dawn was breaking. Isabela waited at the door. "He refused you," she said quietly. "They all refused me," he answered. "The king is ill, surrounded by liars. Don Lorenzo has stolen your truth and turned it into poison." She did not look surprised. "Then we must wait for Providence." "Providence?" he said sharply. "Do you trust heaven more than men?" "Yes," she said simply. "Men fail." Her calmness undid him. He took a step closer. "And what if I fail you too?" She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Then you will rise again." He had no answer. For the first time in years, pride had nothing to say. That evening, the air grew heavy with the scent of rain. The Count stood by the window, watching lightning flash beyond the fields. He thought of the king lying sick behind guarded doors, of the letter still sealed in his pocket, of the woman in the next room, who waited without fear. When thunder shook the sky, he whispered to himself, "I will not let this end in silence." The next morning, a messenger galloped into the courtyard. His horse was lathered with sweat, his cloak soaked from rain. He dismounted and called out, "By order of the royal council, the girl is to remain here under guard. No one may approach her without permission. The king has taken to his bed." The Count took the parchment and read the seal. It bore the mark of Don Lorenzo. His jaw tightened. "And if I refuse this order, then, my lord," the messenger said nervously, "you will answer before the council." The Count looked toward the house where Isabela waited. "Tell your council," he said, "that I am not their servant." The messenger bowed hastily and rode away. The Count entered the drawing room where Isabela stood near the window. She turned as he entered. "What has happened?" "The king is dying," he said, "and Don Lorenzo has forbidden your return." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then it is as it must be." He shook his head. "No, this cannot be how it ends." He drew the letter from his coat and placed it on the table between them. I will bring him this myself, even if I must force my way through his council. She reached for his hand. If you go now, they will destroy you too. He did not move. Better that than to live knowing I kept silent. Her hand tightened slightly. Then promise me one thing. Do not go in anger. Go in truth. He nodded once. In truth, then. Outside, thunder rolled again across the fields. The Count turned toward the door, the letter clutched in his hand. He knew what awaited him. Guards, resistance, perhaps ruin, but none of it mattered. As he mounted his horse, lightning split the horizon. He rode hard toward Seville, rain striking his face like cold glass. Behind him, the estate faded into mist. Ahead, the city walls glimmered with distant firelight. When he reached the palace gates, the guards crossed their weapons again. The king is dying, one said. No one may enter. The Count held up the letter, his voice rising above the storm. Then this must reach him before his last breath, or Spain will lose its soul. The wind howled through the courtyard. The guards hesitated, glancing toward the tower where light flickered in the royal chamber. Inside, unseen, the king stirred weakly in his bed, while Don Lorenzo whispered lies beside him. The Count raised his voice once more. Let me pass, or let me be judged by heaven itself. Rain hammered the palace gates as the Count demanded entry. The guards, drenched and uncertain, hesitated beneath his glare. One finally stepped aside. Enter, my lord, but you will answer for this, he warned. The Count strode past without reply, his cloak dripping water across the marble floor. He climbed the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, the sealed letter pressed tight in his hand. In the royal corridor, the air was thick with the smell of incense and sickness. Servants whispered outside the king's chamber. None dared enter. Don Lorenzo stood by the door, his robe immaculate despite the storm. When he saw the Count, his expression darkened. You again, he said. Have you no sense of boundaries? Only of justice, the Count replied. Stand aside. You presume much. His Majesty is too ill for visitors. The Count held up the letter. Then let this speak for me. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. That is the forgery you tried to sell to the court. It is the Queen's own hand, the Count said sharply. And you know it. The king's physician emerged from the chamber then, wiping his hands. His Majesty is awake, he murmured, but only barely. The Count stepped forward. Then he will hear the truth before his last breath. Lorenzo blocked his way. You will not disturb him. The Count's voice rose low and dangerous. If I must call the guards to bear witness, I will. Will you silence the truth before them all? Lorenzo's smile faltered. He glanced toward the physician, who looked away. At last, with a gesture of disdain, Lorenzo stepped aside. Very well, but you will not like what awaits you. The Count entered. The chamber was dim, lit by a single candle near the bed. The king lay among heavy sheets, his face pale, his eyes sunken, but still alert. When he saw the Count, he stirred weakly. You defy my orders, he said hoarsely. I obeyed your heart, the Count answered, not your counsel. The king's lips twitched, almost a smile. You have grown reckless. I have grown ashamed, the Count said. Ashamed of my blindness. He held out the letter. Majesty, this is what your daughter brought. Don Lorenzo has called it a lie. I beg you, read it before the light leaves your eyes. The king's hand trembled as he took it. He stared at the seal for a long moment. I know this mark, he whispered. It was hers. He broke the wax and unfolded the paper. The candlelight trembled across his face as he read. With each line, his breath grew uneven. When he reached the end, he let the page fall onto the bedclothes. Eleanor, he murmured. So it was true. The Count bowed his head. Majesty, she is your daughter. She bears your grace, your composure, and she has been exiled for her truth. The king closed his eyes. Lorenzo said the letter was false. He lied, the Count said. He fears the loss of power more than the loss of honor. The king's voice broke. All these years I silenced her name to protect my crown. I thought the past was buried, and now she returns to remind me what I abandoned. She asks for nothing but recognition, the Count said. She forgave your silence before you spoke a word. The king's hand covered his face. For a moment, only the rain could be heard against the windows. Where is she now? At San Telmo, the count replied. Waiting. She told me the truth would reach you when your heart was ready to bear it. The king's hand dropped. Then my heart has delayed too long. From the doorway, Lorenzo's voice intruded. Majesty, you must rest. The count oversteps his place. The girl's presence is a danger to the throne. The king turned his head slowly toward him. Danger, he said quietly. You dare call my blood a danger? Lorenzo's color faded. Majesty, I speak only for the stability of— Enough, the king said. Fetch my council, all of them, and send word to San Telmo. The Lady Isabela will return to Seville before sunset. Lorenzo froze. You cannot mean— The king's gaze hardened. Do as I command. The count stepped forward. Majesty, allow me to bring her myself. Go, the king said softly. Bring her home. When the count turned to leave, Lorenzo caught his arm. You are sealing your fate, he hissed. The queen will never forgive this. I do not serve her forgiveness, the count said, shaking him off. He left the chamber at once. The corridors buzzed with renewed whispers as he strode past. Within an hour he was on horseback again, riding through the rain toward San Telmo. Isabela waited in the doorway when he arrived. She seemed unsurprised to see him soaked and breathless. He knows, she said. Yes, the count answered. He has called for you. She smiled faintly. Then the storm was worth it. He dismounted, still trembling from cold and exhaustion. You forgive too easily. It is easier than hate, she said. They rode together back to Seville, the clouds breaking above them. When the palace came into view, the bells of the chapel were ringing. Inside, the council had gathered, uneasy and pale. The king sat upright on the throne, frail but resolute. When Isabela entered, the murmurs ceased. She walked slowly across the marble floor and stopped before him. The king's voice was low but steady. Do you know why I summoned you? To end a silence, she said. He nodded. Years ago, I wronged two souls, one by love, one by pride. I meant to protect the throne, and instead wounded my own heart. I see her now in your eyes. The court stood motionless. Lorenzo tried to speak, but the king raised his hand. This letter is hers, he said, holding it high. And so are you. He extended his arm toward Isabela. My daughter. Gasps filled the hall. Isabela bowed her head. Father, she whispered. The king rose with effort. Let every record be amended. Let her name be restored to the House of Castilla. The count stepped back, overwhelmed by the sight. He had expected triumph, but what he felt instead was humility. When the king's strength faltered, he reached for the count's shoulder. You mocked her once, he said, his voice softening. And yet you were the first to defend her truth. I see now that redemption comes through those who humble themselves. The count bowed deeply. Majesty, I sought only to right what I wronged. And in doing so, you have righted me, the king replied. Lorenzo made one last attempt. Majesty, the queen will obey, the king interrupted. As will you. The courtiers dropped to their knees, realizing the balance of power had shifted. Isabela knelt beside her father's chair. You owe me nothing, she said quietly. The truth was enough. The king placed a trembling hand on her hair. Then let truth be the crown I give you. He dismissed the court, leaving only the count and his daughter beside him. For a while none spoke. Then the king said, Count, you will remain near her. She will need protection, not from enemies, but from praise. The world forgets that mercy is heavier to bear than hatred. I will serve her as I failed to serve her before, the count said. The king's eyes softened. Then you are already forgiven. Days passed and the palace changed. The whispers turned to admiration, the curiosity to reverence. Isabela moved through the corridors, not as a mystery, but as peace itself. The count accompanied her discreetly, speaking little, always deferential. Yet between them, a quiet understanding grew, one that neither dared to name. One evening, they met by the palace fountain. The sun was low, painting the water with gold. The Count spoke first. "You have transformed this place." She smiled. "I have done nothing but be seen for who I am. That is more than most dare," he said. She looked at him thoughtfully. "And you, my lord? Have you forgiven yourself?" He shook his head. "Not yet." "Then you must," she said gently. "For I already have." Her words broke something within him. He had carried guilt like armor, but her forgiveness stripped it away. He bowed his head. "You are too gracious." "No," she said, "just grateful." A servant approached then, summoning them to the king. They found him seated by the window of his chamber, the evening light soft upon his face. "You two remind me of what youth should be," he said with a faint smile. "Hopeful, even when the world is unkind." The Count knelt before him. "Majesty, you owe me no praise." "I offer it not as praise," the king said, "but as a blessing." He looked toward his daughter. "The court will soon expect a new alliance. Many will seek your hand. I trust you will choose wisely." She lowered her eyes. "I will choose with my heart." The king nodded approvingly. "Then I shall rest easier." In the weeks that followed, the court's noise slowly faded into normalcy. Don Lorenzo resigned from the council and retreated from Seville, his influence broken. The queen, though distant, accepted what could no longer be denied. The king regained a measure of peace. As for the count, he found himself less the subject of gossip and more of quiet respect. The same nobles who once followed his laughter now sought his counsel. He no longer spoke with arrogance. When he passed the servants, he greeted them by name. Yet despite all this, his gaze often strayed to the gardens where Isabela walked each morning. He never approached her unbidden, but their eyes met often, briefly, enough to speak without words. One afternoon, while overseeing a restoration in the chapel, he found her lighting a candle. "For your mother?" he asked softly. "For us all," she said, "so that memory will not harden into pride." He looked at the flame. "Do you think she sees us?" "She sees the change," Isabela said. "That is enough." They stood in silence. Outside, the bells rang for vespers. The light through the stained glass painted their faces with color. "I once believed humility was weakness," he said. "Now I see it is strength disguised." She turned to him. "Then you have learned what my mother wished for you to know." "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Because even the proud can be chosen for redemption," she said. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, as the moon rose over the palace, the Count realized that his life, once built on applause and vanity, had found its meaning in silence and truth. The king's health slowly improved. He began to walk in the gardens again, leaning on a cane, his daughter beside him. The courtiers followed at a respectful distance. When he spoke of the future, his voice was gentle, no longer burdened by regret. One morning, he called the Count to his side. "You have given me back my peace," he said. "Whatever the world may say, know that your name will stand beside hers in my memory." The Count bowed. "Majesty, that honor is more than I deserve." The king smiled faintly. "Deserving is a word for men. Gratitude belongs to kings." He dismissed him with a gesture of kindness. That evening, Isabela found the Count in the gallery overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered below. "He spoke well of you," she said. "He speaks too kindly," he replied. "Kindness is his gift to those who suffered for truth," she said. He looked at her. "And what is your gift?" She hesitated. "To forgive what once wounded me." He nodded slowly. "Then the cord is healed." "No," she said softly. "Not yet." He turned, puzzled. "What remains?" "Something only time can mend," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He waited, but she said nothing more. Outside, the last of the daylight faded over Seville. The bells tolled once, solemn and clear. In that moment, both felt the quiet before something yet unspoken, something neither dared to name, but both could feel rising like dawn. Spring returned to Seville with music in its air. The palace, once haunted by silence, now echoed with laughter and the steady rhythm of preparations. Banners of white and gold fluttered along the terraces. The king had declared a celebration, an evening of joy after long months of turmoil. He called it the Feast of Renewal, a night to honor truth and peace. The Count of Valdenor watched the servants arrange garlands around the courtyard. He felt like a man awakening from a long sleep. His armor of pride had rusted away, replaced by something quiet, uncertain, and painfully alive. He told himself he came only to serve the king, yet his thoughts drifted constantly toward Isabela. That morning, he found her walking among the orange trees, sunlight filtering through the leaves. She was dressed simply, the same calm grace in every movement. She turned as he approached. "You look troubled," she said. He smiled faintly. "I am thinking." "That is dangerous for a man who once preferred laughter to thought." Her teasing softened him. "Perhaps I have forgotten how to laugh." "Then tonight you must remember," she said. "The king's feast is for joy, not guilt." He hesitated. "Will you dance?" "If asked kindly," she replied. He bowed slightly. "Then I hope to find courage before the music begins." She looked at him with gentle amusement. "Courage is easy. Pride is harder to silence." He laughed quietly, a sound almost unfamiliar to him. "Then I shall leave my pride behind when I enter the ballroom." She nodded, though her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than courtesy allowed. "Do that, and the night may surprise you." By evening, the palace shone brighter than it had in years. Candles glimmered in mirrored walls. The scent of jasmine drifted through open doors. Nobles gathered again, but their tone was different now. Less arrogance, more curiosity. The scandal that had once divided them had become legend, retold as proof that humility could mend even royal hearts. The king sat on his throne, pale but content. When Isabela entered, the guests bowed deeply. She wore a gown of soft ivory, elegant yet modest, the faint shimmer of pearls catching the light. Murmurs rippled through the room, not of mockery but admiration. The count stood near the orchestra, his breath caught in his chest. She looked radiant, untouched by vanity, as if forgiveness itself had taken form. He could not move until the king beckoned. "Count," the king said, smiling, "have you forgotten how to greet a lady?" The count approached, bowing before Isabela. "I fear I might disturb her peace." "She has survived worse than a dance," the king said. "Ask her if your heart dares." The count looked up. "Would you grant me the honor?" Isabela met his gaze, her voice calm. "It would be my honor, my lord." The music began, slow and graceful. As they stepped onto the floor, the court fell silent. It was the same room where laughter had once wounded her, the same marble where she had stood alone in a faded dress. Now she stood as the king's daughter, and beside her was the man who had mocked her, now redeemed. Their hands met, tentative at first. The dance unfolded, simple and unhurried. He guided her gently, his movements careful, reverent. For a time, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "I have imagined this moment more than I should." "And how did you imagine it?" she asked. "That you would refuse me," he said. She smiled. "And yet, here we are." He hesitated. "Because you forgive too easily." "Because I see more in you than you do," she said. The words struck him deeply. He looked at her, not as a princess, but as the woman who had faced humiliation with grace. "I once thought dignity came from birth," he said. "Now I know it is earned by heart." "Then your heart has learned," she whispered. He almost missed a step. "Has it earned your forgiveness?" "You never lost it," she said. "Only your faith in yourself." The dance ended, and for a moment, the room held its breath. Then applause broke out, warm and genuine. The king smiled, lifting his cup. "May laughter heal what pride once broke," he declared. The count stepped back, bowing low. Isabela curtsied, her cheeks faintly flushed. As the music resumed and couples filled the floor, the count turned to leave, but the king's voice stopped him. "Count of Valdenor," the king called, "do not go yet. There is one more truth to be spoken tonight." The hall quieted. The king rose slowly, leaning on his cane. "This feast celebrates the end of deceit," he said, "but also the beginning of new bonds." He looked toward Isabela. "My daughter has brought honor back to this court. She has taught us mercy, and mercy, I have learned, deserves companionship worthy of it. He turned to the Count. You once mocked what you could not see. Now you stand among us changed. Tell me, Count, have you found what your heart seeks? The Count's voice was low but steady. I have found what humbles me, Majesty. And what is that? He looked at Isabela. A heart I do not deserve, yet cannot forget. A ripple moved through the hall. The king studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Then perhaps the lesson of this house is complete. He reached for Isabela's hand and placed it gently in the Count's. Let truth be sealed not only by forgiveness, but by love. The guests watched in hushed astonishment. Isabela stood still, her eyes on the man before her. Do you wish this? She asked softly. I do, he said, but only if it brings you peace. She took his hand. It brings me joy. The king's voice trembled slightly. Then let it be so. When I am gone, may Seville remember that mercy was once crowned, not in gold, but in grace. Applause broke again, louder this time. The orchestra swelled, filling the hall with music. The Count bowed before Isabela, emotion raw in his voice. I do not know what I have done to deserve you. Perhaps you simply learned to love truth, she said. He smiled through a breath. Then truth has never looked so beautiful. The king motioned for them to dance again, and they obeyed. Around them, the court joined in, laughter and joy replacing years of silence. As the night deepened, the candles burned lower, their flames soft and golden. When the music slowed, Isabela whispered, Do you remember the first time you saw me? I remember every detail, he said quietly. The faded dress, the silence after your words, the sound of my own laughter dying in my throat. And now? Now I see the same dress in my memory, but it no longer shames me. It reminds me how blind I was. She smiled. Then we are both free of the past. He drew a breath, almost a confession. Will you ever tire of forgiving me? Not if you never tire of learning, she replied. The court began to drift toward the gardens, where lanterns hung from every tree. The Count offered his arm. Will you walk? She took it. Yes, I have something to tell you. They stepped into the warm night. The fountains shimmered beneath moonlight. From the terrace came distant laughter, but here the air was quiet. What is it you wished to tell me? He asked. She looked ahead. When I was in the convent, the sisters used to say that love begins when pride ends. I never understood it until I met you. He stopped walking. You call this love? I call it faith, she said. Faith that hearts can change. He turned toward her fully. Then let me speak mine. Plainly this time. I loved you before I believed I could. Every word you spoke stripped away what I thought I was. You made me honest. Her breath caught. And honesty is all I ever wanted. He took her hands gently. If I could give you the world, I would. But all I have is myself. That is enough, she whispered. From the garden's archway, the king's voice reached them faintly. Do not hide from joy, my children. The night belongs to you. The Count smiled. It seems even kings can bless love. He has waited long to see peace, she said. He looked at her, the moonlight touching her face. Then let us give him what he wished for. She nodded, her eyes bright. What do you wish, my lord? He drew a slow breath. That you never again walk alone. Her reply was barely a whisper. Then walk beside me. They stood in silence as the garden filled with music once more. The first notes of a slow melody drifted through the air. Without speaking, they began to dance beneath the trees, the fragrance of orange blossoms surrounding them. The Count's voice was soft near her ear. I thought redemption would feel like punishment. And now? She asked. It feels like peace. She smiled. Peace is only the beginning. The king appeared at the terrace above, watching them. When he saw their hands entwined, his face softened with pride. The courtiers beside him whispered that the kingdom had found not only an heir, but a story worth remembering. Below, the dance slowed. The Count stopped, still holding her close. Isabela, he said quietly, when the king is gone, the court will demand your marriage for politics. I will not stand in your way. She looked up at him. You still think love can be ordered by counsel? I think the world rarely allows love to survive. Then we will prove it wrong, she said. He hesitated, afraid to hope. You mean that? With all my heart. He bent his head, unable to speak. Their foreheads touched, the world around them blurring into light and music. From the terrace, the king lifted his goblet high. To my daughter, he declared, and to the man who taught her that honor is born from humility. The crowd cheered, their voices rising to the stars. The count looked at her, astonished. Did he mean? He did, she said softly. He gives us his blessing. He exhaled, relief and joy mingling until he could not tell them apart. Then let this be my vow, he said. Whatever days remain to me, they are yours. And mine, yours, she answered. They stood beneath the flowering archway, surrounded by the glow of lanterns and the murmur of the river beyond the walls. The music swelled one last time, carrying through the open windows of the palace. Isabela whispered, "Do you hear it?" "What?" "The sound of laughter," she said. "Not cruel this time, pure." He smiled. "Then perhaps the world is healed." She leaned closer, her voice soft. "Not the world, just us." The count's answer was a quiet promise, spoken into the night. "Then let the world begin again from us." The bells of the cathedral began to ring across Seville, echoing through the valley, each note carrying joy instead of sorrow. In the garden below, the king's daughter and the redeemed count danced once more, their laughter mingling with the chime of silver and the whisper of spring. The king, watching from above, smiled and whispered to himself, "So ends my sin, and begins their grace." The count turned toward Isabela, his voice unsteady with happiness. "Do you forgive me completely now?" She looked at him with shining eyes. "I never stopped." And as the final song began, the courtiers fell silent, for what they saw was not a dance, but a vow without words, the proud made humble, the wounded made whole, and two hearts finding eternity in the briefest touch of hands. The king's voice rose once more, breaking the stillness with a single decree meant for all to hear. Let the wedding be prepared. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.